They used to say the Indiana Fever couldn't attract a superstar if their lives depended on it. The franchise lingered in the background, overshadowed by legendary squads in Minnesota, Phoenix, and a few other powerhouse teams. Nobody talked about them as a genuine contender. They were often dismissed as a permanent underdog, an afterthought in a league loaded with bigger names and shinier championship trophies. But somehow, in what feels like one of the most shocking turns in recent memory, the Fever have flipped the WNBA upside down. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody expected the kind of behind-the-scenes maneuvering that led DeWanna Bonner, one of the most decorated and fiercely competitive players in the game, to snub not one but two potential powerhouses to sign in Indiana. Rumors had been swirling for months. Whispers in back hallways, hushed phone calls between agents, cryptic interviews dropping subtle clues. No one could quite piece it all together, but the tension was building. Most fans, especially those in Minnesota, were convinced that Bonner was heading their way. After all, the Lynx have a storied history of championships, an all-time great coach in Cheryl Reeve, and a roster that looked only a player or two away from making another title run. Plenty of insiders casually brushed off the Indiana Fever as an also-ran, a noble but hopeless attempt to court a big-name player. Then, just like that, everything reversed. Bonner announced she was taking her talents to the one team everyone had overlooked. Now fans, journalists, and even other players are left wondering, how did Indiana become the new promised land, and what does this mean for the balance of power in the WNBA? It's easy to look at one major signing and assume it was a rash decision, or maybe some bizarre personal preference. But from what league insiders are saying, Bonner's move to Indiana was anything but random. She'd reportedly been dropping hints for months, hints that, in hindsight, feel like glaring neon signs. At first, these glimpses were subtle, a passing comment about wanting to be part of a fresh basketball movement, a cryptic social media post praising the next generation of talent, and an uncharacteristically calm reaction to major trades happening around her. Then came the All-Star Game photos. Bonner and Caitlin Clark were spotted in deep, intense conversations, their expressions more serious than you'd expect for two players casually chatting during a celebratory weekend. Nobody thought too much of it at the time. But now, those pictures look a lot like the first chess moves in a game that would ultimately rock the league. The Lynx, by all accounts, never sensed the danger. Cheryl Reeve, a coach known for her ability to lure top talent, believed she had Bonner practically in the bag. Fans pointed to the championship pedigree, the established system, and the star-studded supporting cast. In fact, some people in the organization were so confident they'd land Bonner that they were making plans behind the scenes, preparing press releases, holding time slots for a possible press conference, even imagining how team jerseys would look with Bonner's name on the back. It wasn't just typical front office optimism. It was near certainty. And yet, while Minnesota was busy celebrating a victory that hadn't happened yet, the Indiana Fever were quietly, patiently, almost methodically laying the groundwork for a deal that would leave the entire WNBA stunned. But why all the hush-hush? Why was Indiana so stealthy about their pursuit of Danana Bonner? Some sources say the franchise had learned the hard way about building hype too soon. In previous years, the Fever had tried and failed to land big names, often looking like they were fishing without bait. This time, they kept everything on lockdown. No leaks, no half-baked statements to the media, nothing that would telegraph their intentions. By staying silent, they allowed Minnesota to dominate the headlines with rumors of almost done deals. Meanwhile, Indiana's front office was quietly forging a relationship with Bonner based on trust, vision, and a mutual understanding of where they wanted the team to go. When the announcement finally hit, insiders called it a masterclass in patience and precision. Reeve, on the other hand, was reportedly furious, caught completely off guard by a competitor she'd written off as irrelevant. The Mercury were even more baffled. After all, they went for the ultimate power move. They traded for Bonner's fiancée, Alyssa Thomas, believing that familial ties would make Phoenix an irresistible destination. How many times had we seen players follow their significant others to new teams? It happens in sports more than fans realize. So Phoenix brass were confident, maybe too confident, that Bonner would come running into their open arms. But then she didn't. In fact, she hardly seemed tempted at all. Suddenly, the Mercury were left questioning everything. If bringing in Alyssa Thomas wasn't enough to secure Bonner, what exactly had they missed? Did they overestimate personal relationships? Or was there some deeper aspect of the Fever's pitch that trumped even reuniting with a fiancé? Speculation ran wild. Maybe there was tension between Bonner and Thomas that the public didn't know about. Perhaps, as some rumor chasers proposed, Bonner just didn't think the Mercury had a real chance at winning immediately. But the simplest explanation might be the most accurate. Danana Bonner had already set her heart on Indiana's young, evolving roster. She wasn't looking to coast on an aging super team. She wanted to be part of something fresh, something that could build a championship legacy that belonged to her as much as to the next generation. If you ask her, it wasn't a matter of turning down Phoenix or Minnesota, it was about choosing Indiana. That distinction says everything about where her head was during negotiations. Now the big question, how does a 37-year-old veteran, presumably hunting for one last ring, conclude that the Indiana Fever is the place to get it done? Let's be honest, Indiana was once the punchline of the WNBA. Attendance was unimpressive, performance was underwhelming, and for nearly a decade, they seemed stuck in the bottom tier, overshadowed by more glamorous markets. But then Caitlin Clark happened. Drafting Clark was step one. She's a generational talent whose college heroics made her a household name. Pairing her with Aaliyah Boston, another game-changer in the post, turned Indiana into a team with not just a bright future, but arguably the most electric young duo in the league. Suddenly, the Fever weren't just rebuilding, they were constructing a new super team from the ground up. Bonner, who's always had a knack for sensing untapped potential, saw exactly what was brewing. Sure, Minnesota had Nafisa Collier and Kayla McBride, and that's a formidable duo. Phoenix had the storied presence of Diana Taurasi and a newly arrived Alyssa Thomas. But the Fever had something intangible, a wide-open runway to build a dynasty that could dominate for years to come. And from Bonner's perspective, linking up with a transcendent rookie is the ultimate power move. Once you've been in the league as long as she has, you start thinking beyond immediate gratification. You consider the legacy you'll leave. And if the rumor mill is accurate, she felt that a Clark-Boston-Bonner trio could rewrite the WNBA's hierarchy in a way no one else was expecting. The moment Bonner put pen to paper with Indiana, a ripple effect spread across the league. Suddenly, the Fever were no longer a bottom feeder. They were the new big thing. Free agents who previously dismissed Indiana as a dead end began to take notice. GMs and coaches from rival teams found themselves scrambling to see if more big names might follow Bonner's lead. Social media lit up with debates. Was this the dawn of a new dynasty in Indiana, or just a hype train that would derail once the season got tough? The fact that seasoned analysts even considered the Fever a threat was a giant victory for a franchise that, until recently, felt invisible. Cheryl Reeve's frustration is understandable. The Lynx had every reason to think they'd land Bonner. On paper, they offered a proven system, star power, and a fanbase ravenous for another title. Reeve, known for her no-nonsense approach, rarely fails to close a deal when she sets her sights on a particular player. The entire plan for Minnesota's offseason seemed built around the premise that Bonner would slot in seamlessly next to Collier and McBride. It wasn't just about adding an all-star name, it was about reasserting the Lynx's status as a perennial championship contender. They've been overshadowed recently by teams like the Las Vegas Aces and Chicago Sky, and Bonner was supposed to be the crown jewel that vaulted them back to the top. Instead, the Lynx are left empty-handed, forced to scramble for Plan B in a marketplace that's already dried up. Minnesota's front office even toyed with the idea of trading for Alyssa Thomas themselves, an almost desperate attempt to woo Bonner by reuniting the couple on their roster. But from the moment Indiana got into Bonner's ear, it was clear that no amount of behind-the-scenes maneuvering would change her mind. The heartbreak for Lynx fans is very real. It stings not just because they lost out on a star, but because they were so certain she was already theirs. That sense of betrayal lingers in the air, fueling fan speculation and conspiracy theories about who said what behind closed doors. Then there's the matter of Phoenix, which had placed a massive bet on the romantic angle. In a league where personal relationships often carry significant weight, snagging Alyssa Thomas seemed like a surefire way to guarantee Bonner's arrival. Many fans took it as an absolute given. Of course, Bonner will join the Mercury now. Why wouldn't she? But ironically, that assumption proved to be their undoing. By focusing so heavily on the Thomas-Bonner connection, the Mercury might have neglected to present a larger plan that resonated with Bonner's desire for long-term success. Simply put, she wasn't content to just be near her partner. She wanted a place where she could add another championship ring to her resume and shape a newly emerging powerhouse in the process. If you need a sign of just how drastically the WNBA landscape has changed, look no further than the reaction of players around the league. The moment Bonner revealed her choice, social media exploded with congrats, shocked emojis, and cryptic tweets hinting at more deals on the horizon. The Fever transformed from a team no one wanted to a team everyone was at least curious about. Younger free agents reportedly reached out to Indiana's front office, asking about roster spots. The Fever haven't just scored a superstar, they've turned themselves into a magnet. Even fans who used to ignore Indiana's schedule are now eagerly awaiting the opening tip to see if all the hype translates into wins. Of course, building a champion takes more than hype. Seasoned WNBA watchers know that sometimes a flashy new roster falls short. Chemistry isn't guaranteed. Sometimes the pressure of big expectations can weigh a team down. Yet everything we're hearing suggests that Bonner didn't just sign a piece of paper without ensuring she'd fit seamlessly into the Fever system. Word has it she's been on calls with Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston for months, comparing notes, discussing strategies, and outlining their vision for a run-and-gun offense that might scorch the league. Nobody's promising an instant championship, but the synergy seems real. If they click on the floor the way they click off of it, watch out. Caitlin Clark's influence in all of this can't be overstated. She entered the league with a fan base that's borderline fanatical about her. Everywhere she goes, the media follows. That's publicity not just for her, but for any teammate she has, which means a savvy veteran like Bonner can ride a wave of publicity that rarely comes to the WNBA. But it's more than hype. Clark's skill set, her uncanny court vision, her ability to shoot the lights out, and her knack for making teammates better is the perfect complement to Aaliyah Boston's dominance in the paint. Add Bonner's versatility, leadership, and proven clutch performances, and you have the nucleus of what could be the next dynastic squad. Bonner, in her official statements, didn't shy away from talking about how she sees the Fever growing into something unstoppable. For a 37-year-old, investing in a bright future rather than an immediate sure thing might seem risky, yet she clearly believes the payoff is worth it. Critics, of course, will argue that the Fever are still a few years away from real contention. The league had a handful of juggernauts in New York, Las Vegas, and Chicago that aren't going anywhere. But Bonner's choice underscores a broader shift. Veterans no longer see rebuilding teams as bottomless pits of despair. They see an avenue to build lasting legacies alongside the next wave of superstars. And if an established champion like Danana Bonner can break the mold by joining a so-called underdog, who's to say others won't do the same next season? For the Lynx, it's a particularly bitter pill to swallow. They'd assembled what they believed was an airtight presentation for Bonner, a storied history, an excellent coaching staff, a solid roster that needed just one more piece. On paper, it should have been irresistible. But they misread the market. They assumed a desire for an immediate ring would override everything else, including the thrill of shaping the league's next epic storyline. By the time they realized Bonner's heart was in Indiana, it was too late. Now they're left to pick up the pieces, while Reeve, by all accounts, is venting her frustrations behind the scenes. Phoenix isn't in much better shape. They made a splash with the Alyssa Thomas trade, presuming that Bonner would follow. The league's rumor mill insists the Mercury are furious that all their carefully laid plans fell apart. Some say the tension in Phoenix is brewing. There might be a sense of betrayal from Thomas, too, who presumably believed she'd be reuniting with Bonner. Whether that tension spills into the public remains to be seen, but it's an open secret that the Mercury front office feels blindsided. They invested a huge chunk of their future in acquiring Thomas, and without Bonner, the roster might not be as instantly formidable as they'd hoped. But while Phoenix and Minnesota try to salvage their off-seasons, Indiana celebrates a new day, practically unrecognizable from the team they were just a year ago. Fans who stopped attending games because they were tired of lackluster performances are returning. Ticket sales are climbing. Media outlets that once ignored the Fever are covering every little development, from training camp to potential signings. It's not just about Bonner's star power. It's about the electricity generated by Clark and Boston, the sense that the Fever are building a run-and-gun, unstoppable force that could change the way the WNBA plays basketball. And Bonner is the perfect veteran to shape the younger talent around her, providing stability, wisdom, and a champion's mentality that can guide them through the ups and downs of a grueling season. So what happens next? The rest of the WNBA is scrambling. Teams like Las Vegas and New York remain formidable, boasting rosters full of established stars. But while they're enjoying success right now, Indiana is poised to challenge that dominance sooner than most people anticipated. The mere possibility that the Fever could dethrone some of the league's current giants is enough to keep fans glued to social media, searching for the latest rumors about possible trades or signings. The next wave of free agency might witness even more shocking moves as players reconsider the once absurd idea of joining Indiana. After all, if Bonner believes they can win now, maybe they can. And maybe, just maybe, she's seeing something that the rest of us will only fully understand once the season tips off.